Welcome to my channel, States of History. Today's story is one that will grip your heart, test your emotions, and make you question what true strength really looks like. This is not just about the uniform or the rank. It's about resilience, dignity, and a courage that no humiliation could destroy. She was known around the base as Second Lieutenant Jade Foster. Young, determined, and fresh out of officer candidate school, Jade had walked into the military world with a heart full of fire and the quiet strength of someone who had been underestimated her whole life. Her father had been an electrician, her mother a teacher. They were not a military family, and no one expected Jade to wear the uniform. But she had grown up watching documentaries about wars, hearing stories of those who fought for freedom, and she wanted to be among them. At 24, she earned her commission. Her uniform was pressed, her salute sharp, and her will unshakable. But not everyone respected her, especially not Colonel Santos. Santos was a man of old habits and an even older mindset. To him, the military was not a place for women, especially not young women in leadership positions. He hid his disdain behind orders and inspections, but every soldier on the base knew how he felt. He would nitpick Jade's reports, criticize her stance during drills, and roll his eyes whenever she spoke in briefings. Jade endured it. She knew respect was something earned slowly, not given overnight. She worked harder, stayed longer, and treated every soldier, no matter their rank, with dignity. Slowly, whispers began to spread that Lieutenant Foster was different. Fair but tough, kind but strong. And perhaps that was what unsettled the colonel most. The breaking point came one afternoon in the officers' barracks. Jade had been summoned to Colonel Santos's office. She expected another lecture about her lack of experience, but instead she found herself in a confrontation that would scar her memory forever. The colonel sneered at her as she stood at attention. "You think you belong here, Foster. You think putting on that uniform makes you one of us. You're a joke, and I'll show you just how much of a joke you are." Before Jade could react, Santos grabbed her arm, dragged her toward the restroom, and shoved her inside. The few soldiers who witnessed it froze, torn between shock and fear of crossing a superior officer. In an act so degrading it would stain the reputation of any man, the colonel forced her head down and dumped it into the toilet. Cold water rushed over her face. The sting of humiliation was worse than the choke of water in her lungs. She pulled herself up, gasping, her heart hammering with rage, with shame, with disbelief that someone entrusted with command could stoop so low. For a split second, she wanted to scream, to break down, to run. But instead, she stood up straight, water dripping from her dark hair, and locked eyes with him. Her voice did not shake. "Colonel, you have just disgraced not me, but the uniform you wear. And every soldier under your command will remember this moment, not as my humiliation, but as your shame." She walked out. She did not slam the door, did not raise her voice. She walked out in silence, soaked, pale but unbroken. Word spread across the base within hours. Soldiers whispered about what had happened. Some were outraged, some were afraid, but all were stunned by Jade's composure. She had not retaliated with anger. She had not reported him immediately. She had walked out with her dignity intact, refusing to be dragged into the filth of his actions. That night, alone in her room, Jade wept quietly, not for herself, but for the idea that someone so dishonorable could hold command over men and women who deserved better. She prayed for strength, then sat down and wrote a detailed report, not of vengeance, but of truth. She included every detail, signed it with steady hands, and sent it up the chain of command. The investigation was swift. Too many had witnessed the act. Santos tried to deny it, then to justify it, claiming it was a lesson in toughness. But his lies fell apart against the weight of witnesses and Jade's unwavering testimony. When the day of the hearing came, Jade stood in her uniform before the panel of officers. Santos sat across from her, red-faced and seething. She did not gloat, did not sneer. She simply told the truth. Every word cut deeper than any insult because it revealed not just what had been done to her, but the kind of leader Santos had always been. The panel ruled unanimously. Colonel Santos was relieved of command, stripped of his rank, and dishonorably discharged. The news rippled through the base like a shockwave. Soldiers who had once feared him stood a little taller. And Jade, though still young and still learning, had earned something no training could ever teach: respect. The investigation had revealed everything. Corporal Diego Cruz testified about Santos's pattern of discriminatory behavior toward female soldiers. Private Anthony Martinez confirmed months of inappropriate comments and hostile treatment. Private Sofia Russo described the toxic environment Santos had deliberately created. Even Sergeant Marcus Hunt admitted he should have reported Santos's conduct earlier, but had been afraid of retaliation. The paper trail was damning. Santos had a career-long history of bias against women officers, carefully hidden behind the veneer of military discipline. But when he crossed the line into physical assault and humiliation, that veneer shattered completely. During the hearing, Santos had tried to paint himself as a traditionalist maintaining standards. He claimed Jade was too soft, too inexperienced, too emotional for military leadership. But his words rang hollow against the testimony of a dozen witnesses who described not discipline but cruelty, not standards but prejudice. The panel's decision was read aloud in a formal proceeding attended by the entire command staff. Santos stood at attention as his rank insignia were ceremonially removed, his face a mask of barely contained fury. He was escorted off the base that same afternoon, his military career ending in disgrace after 23 years of service. Weeks later, as Jade walked across the parade ground, a group of soldiers stopped what they were doing. One by one, they raised their hands in salute. Not out of obligation, but out of honor. Jade returned the salute, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. She had not fought with fists, nor with rage. She had fought with dignity. And in doing so, she had shown the entire base what true leadership looked like. Years later, Jade would go on to earn higher ranks, leading soldiers in difficult missions overseas. Her story became a quiet legend whispered among recruits, the day a young lieutenant stood unbroken against humiliation and turned it into a lesson of strength. Not many knew the details, but those who did never forgot. They said it was not the act itself that stunned the base. It was what she did after. She refused to be reduced by hatred. She refused to let humiliation define her. Instead, she held her head high and proved that respect cannot be taken away, only surrendered. And Jade Foster never surrendered. Her story spread beyond the base gates. Other installations heard whispers of the lieutenant who had faced down a colonel's cruelty with nothing but dignity and truth. Young officers in training were told about her response, how she had chosen the hard path of formal reporting rather than the easy path of personal vengeance. Military academies began including her case in leadership courses. Instructors used it to teach cadets about maintaining composure under assault, about the proper use of military justice channels, about the difference between retaliation and accountability. Her testimony became a model of professional conduct under extreme circumstances. Jade continued serving with distinction. She was promoted to captain within 3 years, then to major 2 years after that. She led units in overseas deployments, earning commendations for her steady leadership and fair treatment of every soldier under her command. Those who served with her often remarked that she never raised her voice unnecessarily, never used her rank as a weapon, never confused authority with cruelty. Santos, meanwhile, vanished into civilian obscurity. His dishonorable discharge followed him like a shadow. The skills that had made him valuable in the military meant nothing in a world that could see his true character on paper. He took menial jobs, moved frequently, and carried the weight of his disgrace alone. The contrast could not have been starker. One career built on intimidation crumbled when confronted with accountability. Another career built on integrity flourished because it rested on an unshakable foundation of principle. Corporal Cruz, who had testified against Santos, rose through the ranks as well. He never forgot watching Jade walk out of that bathroom with her head held high. It changed how he understood courage. Real bravery was not always loud or violent. Sometimes it was quiet and dignified. Private Martinez, who had witnessed the assault and later testified, carried the memory with him throughout his military career. He became an advocate for proper reporting channels, encouraging other soldiers to speak up when they witnessed misconduct. He often said that watching Jade maintain her dignity in the face of such degradation taught him that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit in it. Private Russo, another witness, requested transfer to the Judge Advocate General Corps after the hearing. She wanted to ensure that soldiers who faced abuse had access to the legal protections they deserved. The case had shown her that the military justice system could work, but only when people had the courage to use it properly. Sergeant Hunt, who had admitted his failure to report Santos's behavior earlier, became a different kind of leader after the incident. He made it his mission to create environments where junior soldiers felt safe reporting problems. He held regular and formal meetings where soldiers could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. He never forgot that his silence had nearly allowed a young officer to be destroyed. Jade herself rarely spoke about that day. When asked by junior officers how she had maintained her composure, she would simply say that anger would have given Santos what he wanted. He tried to reduce her to an emotional, irrational woman who did not belong in uniform. By refusing to react with rage, by choosing instead to let the system work as it was designed, she had proven him wrong in every way that mattered. 10 years after the incident, Jade was promoted to lieutenant colonel. She commanded a battalion with the same quiet strength she had demonstrated that day in the bathroom. Her soldiers trusted her completely because they knew she would never abuse the power she had been given. They had heard the stories. They knew what she had endured. And they knew she had chosen to become better rather than bitter. The base where it had happened erected a small plaque in the Leadership Training Center. It did not mention names or specific details, but it quoted words that had become famous among those who knew the story. "You have just disgraced not me, but the uniform you wear. And every soldier under your command will remember this moment, not as my humiliation, but as your shame." Those words became a touchstone for a generation of military leaders. They represented the idea that dignity could not be stolen, only surrendered. That true strength lay not in dominating others, but in refusing to be diminished by their cruelty. When you hear this story, remember this. Strength is not just about muscles, weapons, or shouting commands. Sometimes true strength is standing tall when someone tries to drag you down. Sometimes it is walking with dignity when others want to see you broken. And sometimes it is the courage to speak truth when silence would be easier. Jade's story is not just hers. It belongs to every soldier, every leader, and every person who has ever been underestimated. She proved that rank can be given, power can be abused, but honor, that is something you carry in your soul. And that is why her story will always be remembered. Years later, when Jade had become a full colonel herself, she was invited to speak at the same officer candidate school where her journey had begun. She stood before a classroom of young officers, many of them women who had chosen military service despite knowing the challenges they would face. One cadet asked her the question that everyone wanted answered. How did you know not to fight back? How did you know that reporting him was the right choice? Jade was quiet for a moment before responding. I did not know it was the right choice in that moment. I only knew that fighting him physically would have proven his point that women are too emotional for command. I knew that staying silent would have allowed him to do the same thing to someone else. So I chose the only path that honored both myself and the uniform. Ich chose tous. The classroom was silent as her words settled over them. Then one cadet stood and saluted. Then another. Then the entire room rose as one, offering her the respect she had earned not through rank, but through character. Jade smiled at the cadets standing before her, their hands raised in salute. She returned it with the same precision she had maintained throughout her career. But what she said next was what they would remember long after the ceremony ended. The military gave me a uniform and a rank, she said, but could not give me dignity. That came from within. Colonel Santos tried to take it from me that day, and he failed because dignity is not something someone else controls. It is a choice you make every single day, in every situation, no matter how difficult. Some of you will face discrimination. Some of you will face leaders who do not believe you belong. Some of you will be tested in ways that seem unbearable. But remember this: how you respond in those moments will define not just your career, but your character. You can choose rage, you can choose silence, or you can choose truth. I chose truth, and it set me free. The lesson that Jade taught extended far beyond one base, one incident, one disgraced colonel. It became woven into the fabric of military culture itself. Training programs now emphasize that every soldier had a duty to report misconduct, that bystanders were not neutral but complicit, that the chain of command existed to protect soldiers from abuse, not to shield abusers from consequences. Santos's name was never mentioned in official training materials, but his actions lived on as a cautionary tale. What happens when power is abused? What happens when discrimination is tolerated? What happens when one person's cruelty is allowed to flourish unchecked? But more importantly, Jade's name lived on as an example of resilience. Not the loud, dramatic kind that makes headlines, but the quiet, steady kind that changes institutions from within. She had not needed to destroy Santos with her own hands. She had simply told the truth and let justice take its course. So when you hear this story, remember this: strength is not just about muscles, weapons, or shouting commands. Sometimes true strength is standing tall when someone tries to drag you down. Sometimes it is walking with dignity when others want to see you broken. And sometimes it is the courage to speak truth when silence would be easier. Jade Foster's story is not just hers. It belongs to every soldier, every leader, and every person who has ever been underestimated. She proved that rank can be given, power can be abused, but honor, that is something you carry in your soul. The morning after Santos was escorted off the base, something shifted in the air. Soldiers walked differently. They spoke more openly. The fear that had permeated certain corners of the installation began to dissipate like morning fog under sunlight. People realized that the system could work, that justice was possible, that speaking up could lead to real change. Diego Cruz became a mentor to younger soldiers, teaching them that loyalty to your brothers and sisters in arms sometimes meant standing up against those who wore higher rank. Anthony Martinez learned that witnessing wrongdoing without reporting it made you part of the problem. Sophia Russo discovered her calling in military law, dedicated to protecting those who found the courage to come forward. And Jade, she simply continued serving. She did not seek recognition for what she had endured. She did not write books or give interviews about that terrible day. She let her service speak for itself, leading with the same quiet dignity that had defined her response to Santos's cruelty. But those who served under her command knew. They knew what she had survived. They knew the strength it had taken to walk out of that bathroom with her head held high. And they knew that if their commander could face such degradation without losing herself, then they too could face whatever challenges came their way. That is why her story will always be remembered, not because of what was done to her, but because of what she chose to do in response. She chose dignity over rage. She chose truth over silence. She chose to become an example rather than a victim. And in doing so, she changed not just her own life, but the lives of countless soldiers who came after her, who heard her story and found strength in it. Thank you for watching this episode on States of History. If this story touched you, if it made you think, or if it reminded you of the kind of strength we should all strive for, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps keep these powerful stories alive. And remember, history is not just written in battles. It is written in moments of courage like this. The years passed, and Jade Foster eventually retired from active duty with the rank of full colonel. She had served her country for 32 years, leading soldiers through peacetime and war, through easy deployments and impossible situations. But when people asked her about her most important moment in uniform, she never mentioned the medals or the commendations. She always thought of that morning when she walked out of a bathroom, soaking wet, humiliated but unbroken. That was the moment she had proven to herself what she was truly made of. Everything that came after, all the success and recognition, grew from the seed planted in that terrible moment of choice. Colonel Santos died alone 7 years after his discharge. He had never recovered from the shame of his dismissal. His name was forgotten by most, remembered by a few only as an example of what not to become. He had tried to destroy a young officer because of his own insecurity and prejudice, and in doing so, he had destroyed only himself. Jade attended his funeral, not because she owed him anything, but because she believed every soldier deserved that final respect, even those who had failed to live up to the uniform. She stood in the back, said no words, shed no tears, but she was there, and that act of grace said more about her character than any speech ever could. When young officers asked her why she had gone, she gave them a simple answer. I went because I'm not defined by what he did to me. I am defined by who I chose to become afterward. He spent his last years carrying hatred and shame. I refuse to carry either. That is the difference between us. Her final lesson was perhaps her most powerful. The true measure of a person is not what happens to them, but how they respond to what happens to them. Anyone can be cruel when given power. Anyone can break when faced with humiliation. But it takes something extraordinary to stand in the midst of degradation and choose dignity. It takes something rare to face injustice and choose truth over vengeance. Jade Foster possessed that extraordinary quality. She did not possess it because she was superhuman or because she lacked normal human emotions. She felt rage that day. She felt shame. She felt the crushing weight of humiliation. But she refused to let those feelings control her response. She understood something that many people never learn. That how you respond to cruelty says more about you than the cruelty itself says about your attacker. That maintaining your integrity in the face of someone else's moral failure is the highest form of victory. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply refuse to be reduced to your worst moment. Her story resonates because it is not really about the military. It is about human dignity in the face of human cruelty. It is about choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. It is about understanding that respect is not something someone can take from you. It is something only you can give away. Every person who hears this story takes something different from it. Some see a lesson about institutional accountability. Some see a lesson about standing up to bullies. Some see a lesson about the power of proper channels and formal justice. But the deepest lesson is about the indomitable nature of the human spirit when it refuses to surrender its dignity. Jade Foster could have responded with violence. She could have responded with tears. She could have responded with resignation. Instead, she responded with 8 words that became her legacy. You have just disgraced not me, but the uniform you wear. In that moment, standing soaking wet with her head held high, she reclaimed not just her own dignity, but the dignity of every soldier who had ever been demeaned by those who abused their authority. She showed them that power wielded without honor is ultimately powerless. That cruelty exercised against the dignified only reveals the emptiness of the cruel. That attempting to humiliate someone who refuses to be humiliated is an act of self-destruction. Colonel Santos thought he was teaching Jade Foster a lesson about her place. Instead, he taught everyone watching a lesson about his character. He thought he was demonstrating his authority. Instead, he demonstrated his insecurity. He thought he was putting a young officer in her place. Instead, he secured his own place in history as an example of failed leadership. The irony was complete. In trying to prove Jade did not belong in uniform, he proved beyond doubt that he did not belong in command. In trying to show she was weak, he revealed his own profound weakness. In trying to humiliate her, he ensured his own lasting humiliation. Meanwhile, Jade's response created ripples that spread far beyond that one base, that one incident, that one morning. Officers across the military learned about the lieutenant who had maintained her composure under assault. Enlisted soldiers heard about the young woman who had refused to let cruelty define her. Civilians read about the military's swift response to abuse of power. Each telling of the story reinforced the lesson. Dignity is a choice. Honor is a practice. Strength is often quiet. And justice, when properly pursued, will prevail. The military changed its training because of what happened to Jade Foster. New policies were implemented. New protections were established. New channels for reporting misconduct were opened. But more importantly, a cultural shift began. Leaders learned they would be held accountable. Soldiers learned they had the right and the duty to report abuse. And everyone learned that silence in the face of injustice made you complicit in it. One person's choice to respond with dignity rather than rage had changed an entire institution. That is the power of principled action. That is the legacy of choosing truth over convenience. So when you hear this story, remember this. Strength is not just about muscles, weapons, or shouting commands. Sometimes true strength is standing tall when someone tries to drag you down. Sometimes it is walking with dignity when others want to see you broken. And sometimes it is the courage to speak truth when silence would be easier. Jade Foster's story is not just hers. It belongs to every soldier, every leader, and every person who has ever been underestimated. She proved that rank can be given, power can be abused, but honor, that is something you carry in your soul. And that is why her story will always be remembered. The plaque in the Leadership Training Center remains to this day. New officers pass it every morning on their way to classes. Most do not know the full story behind the words engraved there. But those who ask are told about the lieutenant who faced the worst kind of humiliation and responded with the best kind of courage. They learned that she did not fight with her fists. She did not scream or rage or seek personal revenge. She simply stood up, looked her tormentor in the eye, and spoke truth. Then she walked out with her dignity intact and let justice take its course. That simple act of courage changed everything. It ended one career built on cruelty. It launched another built on integrity. It taught thousands of soldiers that maintaining your principles under pressure is not weakness, but the highest form of strength. Years from now, when the people involved have all passed from memory, the lesson will remain. That how you respond to injustice matters more than the injustice itself. That choosing dignity over rage is an act of profound courage. That speaking truth to power, even when you are powerless, is how power is ultimately held accountable. Jade Foster walked into that bathroom a young lieutenant. She walked out a legend, not because of what was done to her, but because of what she refused to let it do to her. She refused to be broken. She refused to be silenced. She refused to surrender her honor. And in refusing, she showed us all what true strength really looks like.